The warden's report said it was an accident. A man slipped in the cafeteria, hit his head on the edge of a table. No witnesses could confirm anything else. Case closed. But 60 inmates who were sitting in that cafeteria that afternoon knew exactly what happened. And not one of them said a word. This is the story of the day Mike Tyson didn't throw a single punch and still ended the most dangerous man in the prison without touching him. The warden's official report was 3 sentences long. Inmate Derek Holloway, age 34, slipped on a wet section of cafeteria floor at approximately 12:47 p.m. He struck his head on the edge of a steel table during the fall. No other inmates were involved. 60 people were sitting in that cafeteria when it happened. 60 people saw exactly what occurred in the 30 seconds before Derek Holloway hit the floor. And when the guards came running and the warden arrived 2 minutes later and started asking questions, every single one of those 60 people said the same thing. He slipped. This is the story of what actually happened and why 60 men who had never agreed on anything in their lives agreed on that. If you want more untold Mike Tyson stories like this one, subscribe right now and hit the bell. We post new videos every single day. Now, to understand what happened in that cafeteria on a Tuesday afternoon in 1993, we need to understand who Derek Holloway was. Because this story is not really about a fight. It is about something much more interesting than a fight. It is about what happens when the most physically dangerous man in a room decides the most powerful thing he can do is absolutely nothing. Derek Holloway had been at the Indiana Youth Center for 6 years when Mike Tyson arrived in March of 1992. He was 33 years old, serving a 15-year sentence for armed robbery and aggravated assault. He was not the largest man in the facility. He was not the fastest or the strongest. What Derek was, in the specific way that certain men in prison become dangerous, was certain. Completely, utterly, unshakably certain of his own position in the hierarchy of that place. He had spent 6 years building that position, not through brute force alone, though he was capable of that. Through a combination of physical willingness, strategic patience, and the particular social intelligence that prison rewards above almost everything else. He knew who owed whom. He knew which guards looked the other way, and for what price. He knew which inmates were 3 weeks from release and therefore too careful to cause problems, and which ones had so much time left that they needed something to belong to. He had built a network out of all of this, slowly and carefully, the way a patient man builds anything. And by the time Mike Tyson walked through the gate in 1992, Derek Holloway was as close to untouchable as a man could get inside those walls. He had heard Mike was coming, of course. Everyone had. The arrival of the former heavyweight champion of the world was not something a prison kept quiet. In the weeks before Mike arrived, Derek had thought carefully about what Mike's presence would mean for the equilibrium he had spent 6 years constructing. A man with Mike's reputation attracted attention, generated loyalty from other inmates almost automatically, created a gravitational pull that could reorganize the social structure of an entire facility without anyone intending it to. Derek decided, before Mike even arrived, that the correct move was to establish something early, not dramatically, not publicly, quietly, privately, in the way that the most effective exercises of power always are. He would make clear to Mike, in terms that could not be misunderstood but also could not be reported, that the Indiana Youth Center already had an order to it, and that Mike's most comfortable path through his sentence lay in respecting that order. He waited 3 months. He was patient. He let Mike settle in, learn the rhythms of the place, establish his own small routines. He watched. He observed that Mike ate alone most days, that he read in his cell for hours, that he trained in the yard with a discipline and focus that made other inmates uncomfortable in the way that extreme competence always makes people uncomfortable. He observed that Mike did not seek alliances, did not involve himself in the small politics and negotiations that consumed most inmates' days, did not appear to want anything from the social structure of the prison at all. This, Derek decided, was actually a problem. A man who wants nothing is a man you cannot negotiate with. A man you cannot negotiate with is, by definition, outside your control. And a man outside your control inside a facility you have spent 6 years organizing is a variable that eventually becomes a threat, not because of anything he does, but simply because of what his independence represents to everyone watching. Derek made his move on a Tuesday. The cafeteria at the Indiana Youth Center held approximately 200 inmates at full capacity. At lunch on this particular Tuesday, it was about half full, 80 or 90 men at the long steel tables, eating institutional food off plastic trays, conducting the quiet business of prison life. Mike was at his usual table near the far wall, eating alone, a book open beside his tray that he was reading between bites. Derek came in with 2 men from his network, not his full crew. This was deliberate. Bringing everyone would have made it too obvious, too theatrical. 2 men was enough to signal support without signaling aggression. He moved through the cafeteria with the unhurried confidence of someone who has never needed to rush, stopped at the food line, collected a tray, and then, instead of going to his usual table, walked directly toward Mike's. The cafeteria noticed, not all at once, but in that gradual, spreading way that attention moves through a room full of people with nothing to do but watch each other. Conversations lowered. Eyes tracked Derek's movement across the floor. By the time he reached Mike's table and pulled out the chair directly across from him without being invited, at least 60 pairs of eyes were watching. Mike looked up from his book. Derek sat down, set his tray on the table, and looked at Mike with the expression of a man paying a courtesy call. "Tyson," Derek said. His voice was conversational, relaxed, the tone of someone who sees no possibility that this conversation will go any way other than the way he intends it to go. Mike said nothing. He looked at Derek, then at the 2 men who had positioned themselves standing at the end of the table, then back at Derek. His expression was neutral, attentive, the way a man looks at something he's still deciding how to categorize. "I've been watching you since you got here," Derek said. "Keeping to yourself, doing your time, not causing problems. That's smart. Shows good judgment." He paused to take a bite of his food, chew slowly, swallow. The performance of a man with all the time in the world. "I run things in here. I think you probably already know that. And I want you to know that doesn't have to affect you negatively. A man with your reputation, with your name, there's a place for that in what I have going. A comfortable place. Easy time." Mike closed his book, set it beside his tray, looked at Derek, still said nothing. Derek continued. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm offering you something. Protection, access, comfort. In exchange, your name. That's all. You don't have to do anything except let people know we have an understanding." Silence. Mike picked up his fork, took a bite of his food, chewed, set the fork down. He looked at Derek with an expression that was not hostile, not dismissive, not nervous, not calculating. It was something harder to read than any of those things. It was the expression of a man who is fully present in a conversation, but has already, somewhere beneath the surface, made every decision there is to make about it. "I appreciate you coming over," Mike said. His voice was quiet, measured, the specific quietness of someone who does not need volume to be heard. "I know what you run in here. I know what you're offering, and I'm going to keep doing what I've been doing." Derek's expression did not change. He took another bite of food, chewed, set his fork down. "That's your answer," he said. Not a question. "That's my answer," Mike said. Derek looked at Mike for a long moment. The 2 men at the end of the table had gone very still. Around the cafeteria, 60 people were watching a conversation that looked, from a distance, like 2 men eating lunch together and understanding, with the specific social literacy that prison produces, that it was something else entirely. "You're going to want to think about that," Derek said. The relaxed conversational tone was still there, but something had shifted underneath it. A weight had entered the words that had not been there before. Mike looked at him steadily. "I've thought about it." Another silence, longer this time. Derek pushed his tray slightly to one side and leaned forward, both forearms on the table. This was a new posture. The courtesy call performance was over. "Let me be direct with you," Derek said, his voice dropping slightly. I've been here 6 years. I have 9 more to go. I've built something in this facility that makes everyone's life easier, including the guards, including the warden, whether they admit it or not. I don't move without thinking. I don't approach people without a reason. I came to you because I thought you were smart enough to see what's being offered." He paused. Was I wrong about that? Mike looked at him for what felt, to the 60 people watching, like a very long time. Then Mike picked up his book, opened it to the page he had been reading, looked down at it. He did not say another word. The dismissal was so complete, so absolute, so utterly devoid of drama or aggression or any of the conventional signals that prison confrontations run on, that for a moment Derek did not process it. He sat there with his forearms on the table, looking at a man who had simply returned to reading as if the conversation had concluded because there was nothing left worth saying, not because Derek had been answered, but because Derek had become, in Mike's estimation, a matter that was fully resolved. Before we continue, drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Derek Holloway has just been dismissed like a background character by Mike Tyson in front of 60 witnesses. What does Derek do next? Tell us before we show you. Now, back to the story. Derek stood up. The movement was too fast, not dramatically fast, not the lunge of a man losing control, but faster than the carefully calibrated pace he had maintained throughout the entire conversation. Fast enough that the 2 men at the end of the table straightened immediately. Fast enough that several of the 60 watching inmates shifted in their seats. Derek's hand came down on the table. Not a slam, a placement, deliberate. The sound it made was flat and sharp, and it cut through the low ambient noise of the cafeteria like a period at the end of a sentence. Mike did not look up from his book. Every person in that cafeteria held their breath. Derek stood there with his hand on the table, looking down at a man who was reading, and the thing that happened in the next 4 seconds was not a fight, and not a confrontation, and not any of the things that prison stories are usually made of. What happened was something quieter and more devastating than any of those things. Nothing. Mike turned a page. Derek's hand was still on the table. His 2 men were standing at the end of it. 60 people were watching, and Mike Tyson was reading his book, and the complete indifference of that, the absolute, unperformed, genuine indifference, the indifference of a man who has decided that what is happening around him is simply not significant enough to interrupt what he is doing, landed in the room with more force than any punch could have produced, because a punch can be answered. A threat can be countered. Aggression generates aggression, and the whole machinery of prison confrontation runs on exactly that exchange. But indifference, real indifference, the kind that does not perform itself, that does not sneak glances to see if it is being observed, that simply is. Indifference has no answer. There's nothing to push back against. There is no exchange to win. Derek had built 6 years of authority on his ability to generate a response in people. Fear was a response. Loyalty was a response. Even resistance was a response, because resistance acknowledged that he was worth resisting. What Mike was giving him was the one thing his entire system had no mechanism for processing. He was being treated as irrelevant. Derek picked up his tray. His face was composed, controlled. The face of a man who has spent 6 years learning to not show what he is feeling in situations where showing it would cost him something. He turned and walked back toward his usual table. His 2 men followed. The cafeteria watched them go. For a moment, nothing moved. Then Mike turned another page, and slowly, like air returning to a room after a door closes, the cafeteria came back to life. Conversations resumed. Forks moved. The ordinary noise of 80 men eating lunch reasserted itself over the silence. But something had changed. Everyone in that room felt it, even if no one could have articulated exactly what it was. A recalibration, a quiet but fundamental shift in the understood order of the place. 3 minutes later, Derek Holloway stood up from his table abruptly, knocking his tray sideways, and walked toward the exit. One of his men said something to him. Derek turned, and the movement was sharp and uncontrolled, and his foot came down on a wet patch of floor near the end of the table, and he went down hard, his hip hitting the edge of the steel table on the way. the impact producing a sound that made everyone nearby wince, and then he was on the floor. Guards came running. The cafeteria froze again, this time in a different way. When the warden arrived 2 minutes later and began asking what had happened, 60 men looked at him with the same expression. "He slipped, Warden. Wet floor. We tried to warn him. Bad fall." Derek was taken to the infirmary. He had bruised his hip and cut the side of his head. Nothing serious. But he limped for 2 weeks afterward. And for those 2 weeks, and for a long time after them, something about the way other inmates looked at him had changed, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that these things always change in closed environments, quietly, incrementally, and permanently. The warden's report said it was an accident. 60 people knew it was not an accident. They knew it was the consequence of a man so thoroughly destabilized by a conversation that ended with the other person reading a book that he lost the basic physical coordination to walk across a cafeteria floor without falling. Mike ate the rest of his lunch, finished his chapter, returned his tray, went back to his cell. He had not raised his voice. He had not stood up. He had not made a threat or a gesture or any of the things that the language of prison confrontation is built on. He had simply refused to participate in a system that required his participation to function, and then continued doing what he had been doing before the interruption. And the man who had spent 6 years making himself untouchable inside those walls had walked away from a lunch table and fallen on a cafeteria floor and been written up in an official report as a slip-and-fall incident. The 60 men who watched it happen would tell the story for years. Not loudly. Not in the way that stories get told when people want credit for having been present. Quietly. The way people tell stories about things they witnessed that they are still not entirely sure they understand. The story was always the same. Mike Tyson sat in a cafeteria and read a book, and the most dangerous man in the prison fell down trying to walk away from him. The warden called it an accident. 60 inmates knew the truth. And the truth was this: the most powerful thing Mike Tyson did in 6 years of prison had nothing to do with his fists. It was the ability to sit completely still, in the middle of everything, and simply not need what the people around him were offering. That is a kind of strength that does not show up in any official report. But 60 men saw it, and not one of them forgot it.